This is Ayani.
And this is Corinne.
And you're listening to Sex, Love, Literature, a pop culture podcast where we take a semi-scholarly look at why
and how
the sex stuff in media matters.
For our 9th episode, we're talking WandaVision, Disney Plus's first television series set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It's love, sex, and robots, MCU style.
Before we get started, though, remember that you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at SexLoveLit, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform.
As always, thanks so much for listening, and now let's get on with the show. Welcome back, y'all, to Sex Love Lit. We are super excited, as always, to have you tuning in and listening to us. So as our little opening said, today we are going to be talking about the, hit mini-series WandaVision. Mm-hmm. Corinne and I have a lot of feelings about this show, especially about the ending.
I think we just have an excess of feelings, and then we watch television that provides even a little bit of an outlet, and then the floodgates open.
It's so true. It's so true. Our new running gag is that I cry about joke characters when they have emotion.
She totally does. It's wild.
When it's supposed to be like an emotional moment that's a joke, I am full-blown weeping. Like, how could they do this to them? So I think you're right that there's just an excess of emotions. Before we dive into WandaVision, though, since we're talking about other things that are going on in our lives as far as shows that are making us cry, Corinne, what's something that you're watching right now or reading or playing that's resonating with you?
So I just finished the Korean drama Hospital Playlist, which is, at least in the United States, available on Netflix. It is delightful. It's by the same writers who did the Reply series, so it has a great ensemble cast. The 5 main characters are 40, which is like not a thing that happens that much in American television.
I like it. Yes, life doesn't end when you turn 40.
But they're all doctors at a hospital who have been friends since med school. So they've been friends for 20 years. And it's just a very quiet, heartwarming show. And I cared about all of the characters, and it was a very comforting watch. Oh, and it's called Hospital Playlist because they form a band.
So I'm not going to lie, like low-key, one of my goals that is not really a goal is to create a cover band for one of my favorite bands that doesn't exist anymore. So like, I feel that. I get it. Well, on the flip side, I am watching something that is not comforting at all. I'm watching the anime Vinland Saga, which is so good. It's on Amazon Prime for streaming. And it's about Vikings in, I guess, the 900s, the 1000s AD, and they are Vikinging it up. There's violence and blood, but also I'm so sad for the main character, and it's so good, but it's not comforting at all. Like, there are people that I'm like, wow, you're going to get yours, and I'm really going to enjoy it when you get yours, and other people that I'm like, oh my God, if you die, I don't know what I'm going to do. So it's a lot of fun.
So yours would be the one where I'm like, I want to watch high melodrama. That's what I should go for.
Yes, exactly. High melodrama, but also like a lot of death. I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot. But I'm really loving it. My brother and Andrew, my spouse, and some other people were like, you need to watch it. So I'm watching it. It's really good. I like it. I am probably going to finish the season in the next couple of days because I can't stop watching it. But that's kind of where we are media-wise right now. So, we're going to dive right in then to WandaVision and talking a bit about that. I loved it.
Yeah, it was a good show. It's one of the first things I've watched in a while that dropped on like a week-to-week basis instead of the like binging thing. Because with K-dramas, I typically won't start something until most of it is aired because I hate waiting. But we had a good ritual going on with watching WandaVision on Fridays when it dropped.
Yeah, and having pizza. It was delightful. Oh, well, that's the one thing that was sad that happened in our lives is that our favorite pizza shop closed, but neither here nor there. So, Corinne, why don't you clue the folks in to what this WandaVision is? Because, nobody watched it,
So in case you missed the media hype, WandaVision is an American television miniseries created by showrunner Jack Schaefer for the streaming service Disney Plus, based on the Marvel Comics characters Wanda Maximoff, also now officially known as the Scarlet Witch,
Officially.
and Vision. Set 3 weeks after the events of Avengers Endgame, Wanda and Vision are living an idyllic suburban life in the town of Westview, or so it appears. Oh, also it's in New Jersey. Trying to
Very
conceal
important.
their true nature. People who are from New Jersey always let you know.
Yeah, it's an important fact that people from New Jersey are from New Jersey. I'm just saying.
So as the episodes progress, they seem to begin to enter new decades and encounter various television tropes, and the couple begins to suspect that things are not as they seem.
Bum, bum, bum.
So like we mentioned, it's a mini series of 9 episodes that aired from January 15th to March 5th, 2021. And we're just letting you know, spoiler warning, it's not really possible to discuss this show without spoilers because it just can't do it. So we're just diving in with the spoilers.
Yeah, from jump. Actually, the characters have spoilers in them. So like if you have not watched WandaVision, come back to this episode after you have.
Or if you don't care about spoilers, then you can listen anyway.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, honestly, I thought, and we'll come back to this a little bit if when we think about audience, because that's what we do. But I thought that it was such a good mystery, the way it all unfolded. This is the kind of show that I would have gotten pissed if I'd been spoiled for. So if you care, then like, don't come back, you know, but
we will come back to that question when we think about audience.
Yes, exactly. But for first, characters. So we have Wanda Maximoff, who is played by Elizabeth Olsen. Wanda, we've seen her in multiple Avengers films, but this is the first time that we actually have a piece of MCU media that's focused specifically on her, which is part of the reason, at least for me, is that it was really compelling, is that this wasn't a character that we had sat with before. And I think that's also kind of the plus side of the Disney Plus Marvel programming that's coming out, is that there's going to be a lot of attention paid to characters who were on the sidelines before of very large ensemble casts. So playing off of Wanda, we have Vision, who's played by Paul Bettany, who is a fantastic husband to Wanda over the course of this show. Vision, of course, was born from a combination of a body that Ultron was making in Age of Ultron and the Mind Stone. So he was this kind of highly advanced hybrid android robot man who's also made of vibranium, so also very, very strong and can fly and phase through things. And we love Vision. We support Vision in this podcast, I would say. So our antagonist figure is Agatha Harkness, who is codename, I guess her pretend name was Agnes. That's who we thought she was the whole time. It's actually Agatha. It was Agatha all along, played by Catherine Hahn, who is fantastic in this role. She was so good. Scene stealer, I would say, a lot of the times.
Well, and this is something that I think a lot of people kind of said, like the reveal that it was Agatha all along was really not that much of a reveal, because like if you have a character being played by Catherine Hahn, she is not going to be just the neighbor. Like that's just the deal.
Yeah. And one of the things that they did is on the wall when they were putting up everybody's name outside of Westview, or Wanda's, bubble of magic, right outside of the hex, they had their like real name next to it. But then for Agnes, there was no real name. So it's like, oh no, who is that? Also, I watched Spider-Verse today, and, it was nice to see a little bit of her there again as Doc Ock. We also have Wanda and Vision's sons, Billy and Tommy, who are played by Julian Hilliard and Jet Klein, respectively. They gain in importance as the show goes on.
And they also age as the show goes on. So those are the actors who play them when they're 10.
When they're 10, right. Delightful children. I enjoyed them myself. And a special shout out to Teyana Paris, who plays Monica Rambeau. I don't know if we're going to get a chance to talk a lot about her today, but I know I loved her in this and wanted more of her. So looking forward to seeing more of her as the MCU continues to expand and grow, and more properties, come to light. Oh, and just, I'm assuming that people know what I'm saying when I say MCU, but just in case, MCU stands for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is different than I would say the grander, Marvel Comics universe or things like that.
Well, and that actually seems like a good way to move in then to our discussion,
Sure,
our main
yeah.
discussion, because one of the things that I saw about WandaVision that was really interesting is there were a lot of people sort of asking if they could watch WandaVision if they did not know the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh, that's interesting. Part of me says no.
The answer
Like,
seemed to be yes.
really? Ooh, that's a tough one because for me, so much of
So first of all, what is your relationship to the Marvel Cinematic
oh
Universe,
yeah,
Ayani?
I was getting right into it. I was like, ooh, I disagree. So in case you didn't listen to our first introduction in our first episode way back when, part of what I do in our PhD program is that I'm a comic studies person. So while most of my study is largely thinking about small presses, independent production, and that kind of stuff, I do have a long passing knowledge of just Marvel comics in general. My dad was he's very much still alive. My dad is a huge comic nerd, so I got a lot of that stuff just through osmosis. And I've been watching the MCU movies since Iron Man. So
Mhm.
kind of watching all of them over the last, God, I don't even know how long it's been because I remember when it was 10 years and we're now even moved beyond that 10 years. So kind of the
Mhm.
whole run of this kind of version of the MCU, because going and seeing comic book movies was just something that we did as a family.
Mhm.
So while I forget details because I'm old and my brain stops working sometimes, like I have a full knowledge, I guess, of what's been happening in the MCU.
Mhm. So for me, I'm a little bit, well, a lot less immersed than Ayani. I've read a handful of Marvel comics, mostly Miss Marvel in the Kamala Khan iteration, and then a little bit of the beginning of Miles Morales, but that was
hmm
to teach them.
It's
So
important. It's important. You got to read about the babies.
I have seen. I'm pretty sure I've seen all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. I don't really like Iron Man very much, so I think I might have missed Iron Man 2. Uh,
Yeah, that's fine.
oh, and I haven't seen the Hulk movie with Edward Norton because, again,
Oh, yeah,
bad.
okay.
But since then, I've I don't know. I see most of them once. I have a couple that I really like. Like I really like Captain America: Winter Soldier, and I really
Mm,
like Thor:
mm,
Ragnarok. But other
mhm.
than those, they aren't really movies or things that I revisit. I just will see the next one
Ah.
and then try and
Yeah, yeah,
remember what was happening.
yeah.
I will say though that I do deeply love Peggy Carter, and I watched Agent Carter when it was on ABC, and I
Ah.
will die mad that it was canceled with the character bleeding out at the end of the last episode, and we don't know if he lives or dies, and I will be angry about that forever.
Well, that's okay. We can pretend he lives. Why not? But you actually bring up an interesting point because I did not watch a lot of the television shows.
Mm.
So I didn't watch Agent Carter. I only watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. around when Captain America Winter Soldier was coming out so that I
Hmm.
could see those tie-ins happening there. And what other Marvel TV shows were there that I did not watch?
I think those are the ones that are, well, were sort of part of
Yeah.
the MCU because there are the spin-offs that were on Netflix.
Ah, that's different though. Those shows,
Yeah.
those weren't MCU shows, and I did watch. Well, see, ain't that some stuff? Because I watched those, or at least the first seasons of them, except for Iron Fist, because I heard that was trash. But they weren't connected. This was before we had kind of the coalescing, let's say, of
Hmm.
Marvel under the Disney Plus umbrella of streaming, which I think.
Well, and
Oh, go ahead.
also, so I was thinking about this, and when we think about WandaVision as a show, as this one-off season, I feel like something like WandaVision wouldn't really have even been possible 10 years ago. 10-ish years ago when Agents of
Yeah.
S.H.I.E.L.D. was starting, because the way we think about television and like the golden age of
Yeah.
television like has changed so dramatically with like Game of Thrones, with
No, yeah, sure.
Watchmen, like, and Mad Men, like all of these different properties, like none of which I really even watched, but that have changed how we think about the kind of storytelling and sort of the epicness that's possible
Yeah.
in a television property that I just don't think we thought about in the same way, at least in the United States, until
Right.
recently.
No, that's an excellent point. Yeah, HBO definitely kind of had a hand in HBO, Showtime, a lot of these, but I think HBO is one of the big ones, had a hand in really changing how we think about storytelling and narrative on television.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that kind of the shift also to streaming has done is kind of changed how we think about continuity
Mm-hmm.
across properties. So the fact that, I mean, there were always crossover episodes, right? That kind of play was always a thing. That's been a trope forever. But
Mm-hmm.
thinking about like the Netflix Marvel programming with Luke Cage and Iron Fist and Daredevil and Jessica Jones, the fact that, oh, and I think the Punisher too, right? I don't know if the Punisher was tied in, but the fact that they then had the show starring all four of them,
Mm-hmm.
and which the name is escaping me right now.
The Defenders?
It was the Defenders, right? Sorry, I was just watching a documentary that was talking about Luke Cage as the hero for hire or heroes for hire, right? So I was like, that wasn't the name of the show. But the fact that then there is this crossover show that expects that you've watched all of these other things and you're coming to this with this knowledge. So all of that builds to the kind of media that you get with WandaVision, in that
Mm-hmm.
there is however many years of movie history that WandaVision is building on, and kind of maybe in some ways expecting you to know, which kind of brings me to the question you asked. But you had something to say. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was thinking that like it does obviously build on all these years of movie history, and especially like with the origins of Wanda and Vision.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But I do also think there is a certain amount of wiping this like clean that is happening after Avengers Endgame that is perhaps inviting people into this world if they have felt overwhelmed by it.
That's interesting. Speak on that a little bit.
Because there's a lot. It's totally different in tone than
Mm-hmm.
your traditional superhero movie, which has some range in there of what we think
Right,
of as
yeah.
traditional superhero movie. But like when we start this show, it is a 50s sitcom, and like
Right.
the first 3 episodes are like straight up sitcoms
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
set in like
yeah.
the 50s and then the 60s and then the 70s. And something that was very, very interesting about this is they don't, while there are various Easter eggs happening, they don't really clue you in to what's happening until episode 4. And something that I thought was very funny is they don't, when they gave critics like the screening pack, they only gave them the first 3 episodes, and then they had to write reviews for the show based on the first 3 episodes. But it's like, clearly something is happening here, but no one knows what it is. And I think they have it that Disney Plus and Marvel had a certain amount of clout that they could do that. Like they could risk having some like what the fuck is happening kinds of reviews.
Yeah.
Well, because we had talked before that like people didn't like WandaVision at first, and one of the things I think part of the reason they didn't like it is because it subverts expectations of what a superhero show should be like.
Yeah.
And because it wants you to not know what's happening. And not knowing what's happening is uncomfortable.
Yeah, actually, we were literally on the same wavelength, because I know I've had conversations with people, and then also through like anecdotal scrolling through Facebook, scrolling through Twitter kind of things, that people really didn't like the first couple of episodes of WandaVision, which to me was surprising, because I was like hooked from episode 2. I was like, what the fuck is happening? I need to know what the fuck is happening, because there to me were things that were just off enough that I was like, okay, there's some shit going down here that we're going to find out about, but I just need to kind of hang on. So I think it's really interesting that there was that negative response to those first couple of episodes. And I think you're really on base here in thinking that being uncomfortable when reading things or when watching things is, or rather, what did you say? Kind of not knowing what's going on is uncomfortable. And perhaps there is this expectation especially since we're coming to this kind of knowing Wanda and knowing Vision and knowing the MCU, right? An expectation of what is supposed to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, it kind of makes me think of when Andrew and I were watching Tenet, and I was like, what is happening here? There is that kind of level of emotional disconnect, perhaps, where you're like trying to put the pieces together, but they don't want to be put together right away. You
Well,
know?
and there's also, like, I think sometimes, not to speak ill of my students, but one of the things that, like, I encounter in teaching sometimes is, like, if something is difficult,
Mm-hmm,
particularly
mm-hmm.
in something like children's literature or a superhero property that is deceptively difficult, there's this tendency to be like, oh, well, like, I don't not to acknowledge that, like, maybe you think it's bad because you don't understand it, but, like,
Mm,
there is this tendency to be like, I don't understand what's happening, therefore it must not be done well, therefore it is bad, because there is an
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
expectation for it to be simple.
Yeah, and
And
easily understood.
and I think
Mm.
WandaVision, especially in the first 3 episodes, is deceptively complex. So it's
Yeah.
easy to be like, I don't understand, therefore it is bad, instead of being, well, like, let's figure out why you don't understand. And maybe you will understand later, and then you'll appreciate better. And I will say,
Mm.
because I went back and rewatched parts of WandaVision to record, that it does reward rewatching.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'm sure it does. Yeah. I mean, also part of it, the reason that maybe we enjoyed it up front is that, like, since we're media studies people, one of
Mm-hmm.
the fun pieces of it was kind of picking apart the different pieces of media that they used in order to create the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and that the color is slightly different from
Mm-hmm.
like the 70s to the 80s. Like, all of that is a lot of fun to play around with and think about.
Oh, and I loved the costumes. I
Oh
loved I
God.
loved the hair. And
Mhm.
also, like, I think that this show in particular, because I think Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany have been underutilized by the larger
Mm,
MCU,
mhm,
because they are
mhm,
these sort of side, almost B heroes, which is wild
mhm.
because their powers are, like, so extraordinary. But like, the first 3 episodes in particular made me really appreciate Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany's
Yeah.
acting, and that there was
Mm,
a lot of
mhm.
nuance going on there. And of course, Catherine Hahton's acting was
Of
amazing and
course.
extraordinary, but, like, everyone already knew that.
It's kind of cool that you mentioned that, because there's a friend of mine, shout out to my friend Delilah. She is doing kind of a fan art series in which she's drawing Wanda in each of the different eras that the show takes
Mm.
place in. So she's already done the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So I'm really looking forward to see what her like 80s piece is going to be like. But one of the things that she's considering, along with like the costume design and the hair, is the different way to pose Wanda that are kind of evocative of the different eras. So thinking about
Mm.
Olsen and Bettany's acting, they in a way had to embody these eras even through the ways they were moving their
Hmm.
bodies in sequences, which is super wild to think about. This is why I'm not an actor, because I cannot do those kinds of things. And I guess that honestly leads me into thinking about one of the other things that we've talked about, but the different ways that love is kind of depicted across time and
Hmm.
across eras, right? Like the things that the 50s would depict as far as marriage and
Well, and
relationships.
it's also not that it's, like, depicting straight up love across those
Yeah, yeah,
eras.
yeah.
It's depicting how the ideals of love, and a particular kind of domestic love,
Oh, yes.
was or is idealized in shows from different decades.
Mhm, mhm.
And part of that, I think, is evoked in, well, it is very evoked in, like, the way their house looks,
Yep,
in
mhm.
their beds. Like, there is, like, the very sort of famous, like, a husband and wife sleeping in separate beds that, like, they play with in one of the
Mhm,
episodes in this
mhm.
show. And I think it would hit differently if WandaVision was, like, making fun of these things. And I don't think
Mm,
it's not
mhm,
it's not
mhm.
satire in that way. It's not, like, mocking them. It
Yeah,
it is legitimately appreciating the aspects of
yeah.
those kind of the way television has, like,
Evolved.
evolved and
Yeah.
developed. And I think that that's intentional, because this world legitimately comes from, like, Wanda's legitimate love of sitcoms.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I I wouldn't quite call it an affectionate parody because I don't feel like they're parodying these things, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
they're
because they're not the butt of the joke at all.
yeah. It's definitely though kind of pulling on, I think, one, Wanda's love for sitcoms, but also the way that sitcoms are just part of the American consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because as the show went on, we were calling out the shows that these things were based on. We were like, oh, that's Malcolm in the Middle. Oh, that's this, that's that,
Mm-hmm.
before there was even the big reveal at
Well,
the end.
and that was part of the fun. That was part of
Yeah.
the puzzle.
So, yeah, it was really good. It was really good. But thinking kind of about these ideals of domesticity, right? Wanda is a homemaker in the first one. We see her cooking, we see her preparing meals, we see her taking
Mm-hmm.
care of the house in a way. And that starts to shift starting in the 60s. It almost feels like she starts going out more. She's not only in the homestead, she's going to spend time with other ladies at this like
Mm-hmm.
pool party, they they integrated a little bit by
Oh,
having Geraldine in there.
well, and
you know?
one of their neighbors is one of their neighbors is black. He's a black
Yeah.
man.
Herb
That
was his name in the universe. But yeah, so Wanda's role, quote unquote, in the house and Wanda's role as a wife continues to change, especially then when they have children, but also the rearing of children and how they take care of children
Mhm.
changes. Though the children weren't born, they were born in the 70s, but they were babies in the 80s. So,
Mhm.
if we're thinking about child rearing and how that's even changed from like the 80s to the 90s to the present day is really interesting, I think.
Mhm.
It's wild just even having this conversation with you, how much thought went into all of these different depictions of television
Mhm.
across different eras. It's wild.
Is there like a particular visual or a particular idea about domestic bliss that like stands out to you in the show, like in this like idealized version of like almost love, like what
Yeah.
stands out to you there?
So this is I mean, obviously everything's gonna resonate with people for different reasons, right? But I know
Mhm.
for me, one of the ones that resonated really personally was the one that was like the 80s, 90s hybrid when they were
Mhm.
like on the lawn together, going about town. It really kind of reminded me of the kind of media that I was blasted with as a kid in the 90s, what it meant to have an ideal family unit, what it means to be like the sitcom nuclear family,
Mhm.
And so that one really stood out to me, but also because I was really here for Wanda's little suspenders. That was a look. I mean, they were all looks, but I was like, oh, suspenders and the jeans. I think I could
Mhm.
do that. My hair is not quite big enough, but I think I could pull that off.
Mhm.
So that was one of the images that really kind of stood out to me, is this idea of the quote unquote perfect 90s nuclear family
Mhm.
that, you know, wasn't, not that it wasn't real. People have, happy families or whatever, but no family's perfect, obviously. But
Mhm.
just that kind of imagery was very, very prevalent. There were so many. I mean, there's always family sitcoms, but like the family with the 15 million kids and that was
Mhm.
very big in the 90s when I was a kid. Like Step by Step, Full House, Family Matters, Sister Sister. That might have been a little later than that, but like that's the kind of shit I used to watch.
Mhm.
So what about for you? Is there anyone that like particularly stood out?
I think something that really stood out to me was, I think, the episode when Wanda gives birth. I think, and
Mhm.
it becomes not just about Wanda and Vision, but about Wanda and Vision and their children,
Okay.
and
Mhm.
that like Wanda's vision of this future included having children and included
Mhm.
having
Mhm.
twins, which I think is
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
interesting. And I also just am really interested in the way that giving birth is depicted in television
Oh,
shows, because it
sure.
takes so much longer to give birth than television shows show it. And also, like, to be fair, I think that was part of the joke in that show,
Right, of
because
course.
Wanda's pregnancy lasted all of a day. So,
I, for me, the one that always comes to mind is the sequence from the first Star Trek reboot film with Chris Pine in
Mm.
it, when the ship is blowing up and this woman gives birth in space. And like the scene is not very long, but also I was like, wait, so we have starships and we're going into space, but birth is still this painful? This is still one. So how many thousands of years are we in the future and she still has to scream like that while pushing a baby out? I don't appreciate that. So I also clock how childbirth looks in media. But sorry, not to interrupt you.
Oh no! Well, and I also watch Call the Midwife, which I
Oh.
think well, it's a British television show that does a better than average job, I think, of thinking about childbirth and the many complications, because it follows it follows midwives over time starting in the 50s, and then I think
Right.
they're maybe in the 70s now. But anyway,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, lots of birth happening in that show. But like that is kind of the standard to which I compare shows that like depict childbirth now.
Yeah.
But I think the emotion that Wanda has there
Mm,
resonated with. I
mhm.
mean, I haven't given birth. I don't know. But the feeling of like, I can't do this. And then Geraldine being like, yes, you can. And also like, you have to, so you will. Like,
Right.
but like that childbirth as well is like an act of love, I guess. Bringing it back to what we're talking about in this
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah. I think I mean all of this show is about love, right?
Mhm.
Love and relationships and romance, friendship relationships, more I think romantic relationships and parent-child
Mhm.
relationships.
That does kind of bring us though to a perhaps question that for Wanda to get pregnant, theoretically, she and Vision had to have sex. So what's the deal with that?
I stand by the fact that I think they had sex because she has an attractive robot husband. Like, if Andrew was a robot, I'm gonna figure that shit out. Like, clearly the babies were part of her imagining within the hex,
Mhm.
right? Vision did not impregnate her. But also, she pulled them beds together mighty quick. Like, even if it was not necessarily sex in the way we think about it,
Mhm.
I think there was some stuff going down after the credits rolled. There was I think I saved the tweet, but there was a scholar on my Twitter feed who had written an article about does the Vision have a penis, and
Mhm.
kind of thinking about that, which of course I read because I study desire and monsters and things. So of course this is within a line of inquiry that I find very important. But it is very interesting, I think, to kind of think about Vision as a husband, as a
Mhm.
spouse, and as a sex symbol in a way. So like, laugh all you want, but I've been on the Twitters and there is definite thirst for Vision that's happening there, and I
Mhm.
support it. I'm the type of person who dates the aliens in the video games because why not? They're human beings on Earth, and if I want to date Garrus, I can date Garrus. Okay,
Mhm.
but I think Corinne has no idea what I'm talking about. But no, I do think it's really interesting to think about, and that these kinds of films and movies give us space to think about is what do desirable partners look like, especially when
Mhm.
we can play around with what desirable partners are, right?
Mhm.
I remember years ago, Andrew bought me this book about, I think it was called Love and Sex with Robots or something like that. And it's
It's
and it's
very on brand for you.
I mean, and this was even before we started like the program. I think this was when I was doing my master's, and I was like, what am I going to use this book for? Lo and behold, I quoted it in my thesis, and I'm probably going to come back to it. But one of the things that kind of rubbed me the wrong way in this text is that it talked about how you could program your robot lover to be exactly what you wanted them to be and
Mhm.
behave and respond to you in exactly the way that you wanted them to. And one of the things that I did not like about that is when you think about relationships, right?
Mhm.
When you think about love relationships, it's about give and take. It's not just about one person giving their all
Mhm.
and their everything to another. We would call those unhealthy
Mhm.
relationships, right? So to kind of raise on a pedestal relationships with robots in which you as the human being are controlling the entire relationship doesn't feel like a relationship to me. It feels like me on my computer, me on my iPhone,
Well,
right?
and also like bringing that adding a lens of perhaps thinking about consent and
Yeah.
consensual power dynamics in there. If one person has all of the power and the other robot has none and does not have like the ability to say no to something, then that's
Mm-hmm.
not a consensual relationship in any
Yep.
way.
Yep. And this is why there was a robot uprising and they put us all in the matrix because people were out here having non-consensual sex with their robots. But actually bringing it back to WandaVision, Vision is a fully capable, thinking, feeling, non-human entity, right?
Although I think that's complicated here because certainly
Right.
that's the case in the previous films where Vision comes
Mhm.
into being. But like
Mhm.
Vision here, both is and is not Vision because he's not
Mhm.
real.
Right. And one of the things that I've found interesting watching WandaVision is how Vision changes across every episode as he learns more about the world, but also more about himself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think in the beginning, in his first appearance, he is very much just the perfect husband that Wanda wants him to be. She
Mm-hmm.
is whew, the quote, "You are my sadness and my hope, but mostly you're my love," right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he was. He was her grief at having lost him, her grief at having lost everything that she wanted, right?
Mm-hmm. Although I do think it's also so there are ways that he is being controlled by Wanda before he knows what's happening, but also like
Right.
before the quote that you said, she also tells him that like he's the piece of the Mind Stone that lives in
Mhm.
her, and
Mhm.
the Mind
Mhm.
Stone is historically the source of the thing that made Vision more than just
Yeah.
a robot.
Right. Mhm.
So that
Mhm.
is still echoed here, and that like Vision doesn't just do exactly what Wanda wants him to do.
Right.
He has more agency than any of the townspeople for
Except
sure.
for Agnes, of
Except for
course.
Agnes, because she's the exception to every rule, and it was Agatha all along. So.
But no, and I think that's super important if we think about, I know your bag is like consent and agency, right? Is
Mhm.
like, could he really consent perhaps to all of the things that were happening to him? But if he's also just a creation of her mind, like how do we, and this might be too big of a question for our podcast here, right? But how
Mhm.
do we even conceive of consent for something that's created from the mind of somebody else, you
Mhm.
know? But I
Well, and
do,
that's
go ahead.
also interesting then when we think about something that is created by you, like when we think about children, like Wanda and Vision's children here are something that Wanda created, but also that like people make children. And part of the difficulty of raising children is realizing when children become their own people and are no longer something you can or should control or like
Right.
have the responsibility to take care of, because there
Mhm.
is like a range here of like controlling someone, but also like when your child is an infant, you do have to legitimately carry them places. That's
Right.
not like just control, that's caretaking.
Right. They can't even lift their little heads. They're all bobbling about.
Mhm.
No, and I think honestly, I think this is something that WandaVision, maybe not to the fullest extent, but is thinking about in the fact that Wanda did create her kids, but then her kids behave in ways that she is not expecting and
Mhm.
do things that she is not in control of. Like they
Mhm.
gain, it feels like, and you are free to disagree with me here, but it feels like the kiddos, the twins, and Vision are all gaining levels that Wanda did not intend.
Mhm. Well,
What?
you could almost argue that they gain. Well, and part of I think why the finale is so sad is that
Ugh.
they gain personhood basically,
Mm.
and they're different kinds of. They're not just real to Wanda, like Geraldine, Monica
Monica.
Rambeau, also like thinks of them as real, but their
Yeah.
existence is tied to this world that Wanda created, and because this world that she created is hurting people, she has to shut it down, which
Yeah.
means she has to shut them down.
Right. Right. Which is complex and complicated. And kind of really does lead us well into like the next thing we wanted to talk about. But really quickly, before we do, I just wanted to before we leave thinking about like Vision as
Sexy.
desirable, Vision as sexy, right? A long, long time ago, when I was a Ute in in undergrad, I remember having a conversation with some friends about how I wouldn't want to date a blue man. And they were like, why wouldn't you want to date a blue man? I don't understand.
Like a blue man from Blue Man Group or like a
No,
blue
like,
man from Watchmen?
I mean, a blue man from Watchmen, a man that is blue.
Okay, it's like,
right?
I don't know if you were opposed to Blue Man Group.
Oh, I mean, they're also a little scary. Like, I don't like their faces. I don't. But I remember being like, no, blue man, absolutely not. Fast forward however many years here, thinking about Watchmen, especially the television show, I was like, I'd date that blue man. And there are other characters too. I play Destiny, and there's a lot of blue men in that. And I'm like, oh, blue man, blue ladies, blue everybody. But Vision is very much coded as not human.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I think about a lot is the way that we think about desirability when we're taking steps away from the I don't want to say the normal, right? Because what is normal? But like the human,
Yeah,
he's
the normal bounds of humanity.
right. And how we kind of constrain and understand desirability. So I think Vision is an interesting case.
I think Vision is definitely an interesting case, but also thinking about the pairing of Wanda and Vision is really interesting because, like, if we think about Captain America, the one where they fight each other, Civil War.
Okay.
The one where they fight each other as opposed to the bad guys.
I was like, everybody's always fighting. Which one?
But like in that movie in particular, Wanda is framed as not just like too powerful for her own good, but almost too powerful to exist. Which when we think about women who are powerful are sometimes, I think, viewed as too scary and too frightening to be someone who could have a legitimate partner. And it is an interesting question, I think, that Wanda, who is the most powerful, I think.
She was about to hand Thanos his ass. So,
well, she's like Wanda and then Captain Marvel, who was like introduced later, like are some of the most powerful superheroes. Like Wanda was the only one who could destroy an Infinity Stone.
Yeah. Oh, and we're talking specifically MCU here, so I don't want to see any comments about like issue 135 from 20 years ago. Like we're speaking specifically MCU continuity.
But yeah, anyway, not to get bogged down in the details here.
No,
but that Vision is powerful enough to be an equal partner to Wanda, and Wanda is one of the only people who could also be powerful enough to be an equal partner to Vision. But that like in order to have an equal partner, she had to go like beyond the human.
Ooh.
And I don't know where I want to go with that, but I think that's something that maybe sits a little bit uncomfortably for me.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, one of the reasons my dad said that I would like this show, I mean, we started watching it at the same time, but we were talking around like episode 3, and he was like, yeah, this made me think of you because Wanda is really making me think of the monstrous woman as a figure. And I think you'll be down with that, daughter. So I think it's a really interesting train of thought to think about humanity, humanness, womanness, monstrosity here, and thinking about Wanda. And if we think of her as a monster, what makes her a monster, right? I am not writing about this in my dissertation. There's already too much to do. But I do think it's a really interesting line of thought.
Well, and that does, I think, then bring us into the last big question we had about this show. Is like in this show, Wanda basically does a bad thing that hurts people for what the show tries to frame as a good or legitimate reason, which was a combination of her grief, trauma, and love. And I think that's complicated. What do you think?
I think complicated is a good word for it because honestly, so I was an emotional wreck watching this finale because of my own personal shit, but also because I think they did a good job of building on the previous episode where we go through like Wanda's past and thinking about how grief and trauma can make us do things sometimes that are not always the best. However, one of the things that didn't sit well with me is that Wanda just kind of runs away afterwards, and there's no real sitting with the pain that she caused all of these people. And I don't know if that's because we're watching things from her perspective, from Wanda's perspective, but it was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like the townspeople being around her and her pain at the circumstance, but not really sitting with like the fact that these people were like being mind controlled,
Mm-hmm. Like Agatha's
and
not wrong when she calls them Wanda's meat puppets.
yeah. Wanda has caused a lot of pain through working through her own shit. And that was one of the things in the finale that kind of didn't sit right with me. Like, you're not throwing the Scarlet Witch in jail, right? What
Mm-hmm.
what cell is going to hold her? So I can understand narratively removing Wanda from the equation and kind of sending her to her cabin in the woods so she can astral project, but like I feel like we glossed over too
Mm-hmm.
quickly the fact that her grief caused other grief and that her pain caused other pain.
Well, and I also like one of the things that Wanda says to Agatha in like their big showdown is like that, because Agatha is framed, I think, correctly as like a villain, but also she's great and I love her and she
Mhm.
was an excellent. She was deployed very well, I think, in this show.
Concur.
But one of the things that Wanda says is like, "Oh, like that's the difference between you and me. I didn't do any of this on purpose." And it's like, okay, well, like it doesn't really matter if you did it on purpose. You still
Mhm.
hurt people.
Mhm.
Your intentions, while I think they should be taken into account, they don't absolve you of guilt.
Yeah, it's like, if I hit someone with a car accidentally, I still hit them with a car,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Granted, it's probably worse if I ran them over on purpose, but
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't change the fact that somebody got hit with a car.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what makes some of these conversations a little complicated. And honestly, I think one of the things that kind of, I don't want to say rubbed me the wrong way, but one of the things I was like, okay, is this is something that they've thought about in the MCU before. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it was handled, I guess, a little sloppily here is kind of like, okay, I mean, you guys have been wrestling with this, but it doesn't feel like you're moving that conversation forward, right? I think it was Iron Man 3 that Tony was kind of having to reconcile the fact that his actions killed a lot of people, and he has his whole kind of thing where he goes and stays in this town with the boy and all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So this isn't something new to how we're thinking about superheroics and superheroes in the MCU. But the fact that this was not a like I'm fighting Thanos and a building comes down, but I'm taking over this town, it just feels like I don't know if we needed another episode, right? I'm not saying that we should have extended the show, but
Mm-hmm.
even Monica is kind of like, they'll never know what you gave up for them. And I'd be like, if you took over my dad and I couldn't get to him for like how long was it? The time period?
Unclear.
Unclear. But if you took over one of my family members and I couldn't get into that town, I don't like, maybe I have some sympathy for the fact that your imaginary husband had to disappear, but like my family member was taken over. Like that's not gonna
Mm-hmm.
my empathy for you is not going to override my upsetness about the
Mm-hmm.
situation. Those two things can kind of exist in tandem. So I don't know. I think I think Monica was written as being a little too soft on
Mm-hmm.
her at that point. But also, what you gonna say to the Scarlet Witch?
Yeah.
Like, but what do you think? I was kind of going off on a ramble there.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I'm not mad at things happening, and I am not even perhaps mad. I would have been perhaps happier with it if they had left it messier.
Mm,
Because,
what do you mean?
like, instead of this sort of absolution because Wanda gave up the family that she wants to exist, like, oh, like that pays for her crimes or her sins or whatever it is that you want to frame it
Yeah.
as. Like that's not enough for me, and I wish the show hadn't framed it as enough for her. And I
Mm-hmm.
also I think it's so complicated because like I remember seeing a tweet like maybe when the show had only like halfway aired, so before we'd seen the end of it and knew exactly what was happening, but someone be like, y'all don't tell me they're really gonna make Wanda the villain of her own show. And I think that is also something that makes me a little bit mad that like this is our
Mm.
sort of, except I mean Captain Marvel I guess was the first woman-centered MCU film. And then Agent Carter was centered on Peggy Carter. But, like, for still one of the first things centered on one of the few female superheroes to then make her, if not she's not the bad guy because Agatha was there, but, like, a bad guy, I think is complicated for me.
Yeah, you know, to not to be devil's advocate, I'm not going all the way there, but I actually thought that it was interesting to have Wanda be a figure and one of our first figures, it feels like in the MCU, who's really complicating what we think about heroes and villains, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I wasn't looking at Wanda as a villain. I think that's going too far. Agatha was a villain. I
Mm-hmm.
think Wanda did some bad shit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, a lot of times in media, our conversations of heroes and villains are too easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tenet, for example, is on my mind, and they called the main character is called the protagonist, and there are other protagonists, and then there are antagonists that they're fighting against. Which, on one hand, I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun. And I know antagonists don't have to be villains, but on the other hand, I think a lot of times we very easily chop things up into heroes and villains, and then it's like
Mm-hmm.
we know who to root for and we know who to waggle our fingers at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something that I liked about this is it's kind of like Wanda is dealing with a duality.
Mm-hmm.
She's not just a hero, but also she's not just a villain. She's a person who did bad things.
I will also say that I'm still kind of mad that, like, no one in the Avengers thought to see if Wanda was okay.
I know, nobody checked in on her. That was some bullshit.
Like, they all knew Vision was dead. Like, did
They call themselves friends. They're not going to check on her yet. You know what? You're absolutely right. And I know they were probably doing those things for continuity reasons and because, like, if you throw the Hulk in the middle of this, it'd make things weird, right? But, like,
she was part of the team.
Ain't nobody checked on her. Wow. They were just like, thanks for your help against Thanos. Bye.
Yeah.
Poor Wanda. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Thinking about the fact that Wanda, like, this is, oh my God. So the fact that this is only 3 weeks after Endgame, and for Wanda,
Mm-hmm.
she's lost Vision less than a month ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and you and I have both lost people in our lives. The
Mhm.
cycle of grief is complicated. It's not like 4 weeks goes by and you're like, okay, I feel all better. You know, the fact that this is such a tight turnaround for Wanda is one of
Mhm.
the things I think that's most heartbreaking for me about this. Like, if this was set maybe 5 or 10 years afterwards, right? Or she had that distance, I think I'd have a different kind of emotional resonance. But, like, she lost Vision less than a month ago.
Mhm.
And that is super heartbreaking to me. But one of the things I also really liked about this show is that this is one of the first times we really get to sit with what the aftermath of everyone coming
Mhm.
back looks like and kind of those lingering senses of loss because of the 5 years that people didn't have. Like when Monica comes
Mhm.
back and her mother has been dead for 3 years, but she's
Mhm.
coming back thinking that her surgery just went well. You know, I think those kinds of texture pieces are part of some of the most interesting work that WandaVision is doing.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And for me, what is kind of making Wanda such a complex and interesting character for me, you know, is thinking about how do you deal with loss when there are so many different kinds of loss that you're
Mhm.
struggling with at once. You know, I mean, I guess for me, I can't say that I am better than Wanda in this circumstance.
Mhm.
Because if it were me, I can't say that I wouldn't have accidentally done the same thing, you know?
Particularly because she was almost goaded into it by Director Hayward, whatever his name
Fuck
is.
that guy. Fuck that guy. He's the worst.
Well, and I think that maybe is an interesting thing to think about just for a second is the way that
Sure.
we are led to think about Wanda and Vision's relationship as like
Mm.
a very if not human one, at least human-like one. And like the words
Mm-hmm.
that Director Hayward is using to describe Vision is like, oh, well, like you could bring him back online, or like he could be programmed a certain way, is like
Mm-hmm.
forcing us to remember that Vision is a robot or robot adjacent.
Robot adjacent.
And then that affects then how Director Hayward thinks he can use Vision
Mm-hmm.
and what he thinks is
Mm-hmm.
allowable or necessary. Also, Darcy was correct to hit him with a truck.
Yes, I concur. I concur. Hit that man with a truck. Yeah, and it falls a little bit outside the scope of our normal conversations, but we didn't really get to sit with like, I know you hate it, but white Vision. And and how he kind of plays into everything. And the question of who is Vision, but even thinking on Vision and Hayward kind of together, the question of what makes a person a person.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the body? Is it the memory? Is it the spirit inside? Is it our mind stone? That makes us who we are. I really think this show is poking at a lot of deep questions that miniseries don't always try to wrestle with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say WandaVision is the most successful show to ever show in existence, but I do think in a way that the MCU has kind of played around with what we expect of superhero films, I think WandaVision is kind of working to expand what we expect from the MCU.
Mm-hmm. And it definitely made me more excited than I had been for these sort of Disney Plus one-off Marvel properties, because it
Mm-hmm.
is so interesting structurally and in the questions that it's asking.
Yeah, I 300% agree. And on that note, we're definitely going to start Falcon and Winter Soldier when it starts on Friday next week, because we have a void to fill in
Yeah.
our pizza eating time.
Yeah, gotta keep those Friday nights hopping.
So I guess this is a good point to see do you have any other, we did like 3 levels of final thoughts, but any kind of last lingering thoughts about WandaVision? Anything that if you had more time, you might want to think about more deeply or take in a different direction?
I think I'm just really sad that her children disappeared. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that, given the second after credits scene, that we
Yeah.
have not seen the last of them, because they were really interesting, and I think and really broadened out the kinds of love that Wanda had to give, not just as a
Mm-hmm.
sister, not just as a friend, not just as part of the Avengers, not just as a partner and a wife, but also particularly as a mother, and that is something she
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be. And then the love that her children had for her
Yeah.
was
No, I think
really
that's
important
great.
to the show. Yeah.
And, kind of building on that, thinking about the kinds of love we didn't really sit with here, we didn't get a chance to really talk about Wanda and Pietro and her brother, and how that grief that she had over that loss is kind of one of the things that brought her and Vision together
Mm-hmm.
in his understanding or trying to understand of what she was going through. And how, while the show is a meditation on her grief at losing Vision, I feel like it's kind of the deeper grief of losing her parents, of losing Pietro, of losing a life, all of the different kinds of microcosms of life that she's had
Well,
till
it
this
kind of
point.
it reminds me. So there's like there's that line that everyone talked about in this show of the what is grief if not love persevering, but
I cried.
oh yeah. But it also reminds me of like another. It's from a book by Eva Ibbotson. It's not like a super wildly good book, but it's one that I enjoyed. And but like it has this line about new griefs bringing old griefs out of hiding.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
And Wanda's grief for Vision, and probably for Tony, and for Captain America, and for like that all brought out her old griefs for her brother, and then going back further for her parents, and for her childhood, for the things that she couldn't have or doesn't have anymore. Yeah, I think the show, particularly in the like previously on episode where we go through Wanda's memories, it shows how those things are interconnected, and it's
Yeah.
not just one thing. And like visually, like when we get Wanda sort of falling to her knees and then having the like blast of power that creates the hex and creates, I guess, hex version of Vision, is like visually similar to the like outpouring of grief Wanda has at the end of Age of Ultron when she knows that her brother is dead. I appreciated a lot of those visual allusions to the rest of the show. Also, one that I really liked that I haven't seen anyone talk about, but hopefully more people clocked it, is like the image of Wanda and Vision and their two kids is like the superhero family was very much like the Incredibles.
Oh yeah. That
I was super into that. That was adorable.
Oh man, yeah. There's so much Easter egging and callbacking happening that I'm sure other podcasts will get into in a way we're not. But I know I'm really excited to see how Wanda's story continues in the second Doctor Strange film, because the first Doctor Strange film was hella fucking trippy. So I'm looking forward to seeing how fucking trippy they can get in this next one. I'm forgetting the name of it, and my brain is like, The Mountains of Madness. And I'm like, no, that's Lovecraft. That is not what this film is called. So WandaVision, I think we liked it a lot. It's not a perfect show, but it's a damn good show. I'm glad that we watched it. I'll probably rewatch it again at some point and cry and cry and cry.
What did you think of WandaVision? What are your thoughts? What did you think of our thoughts of WandaVision? If you'd like to let us know, find us. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at SexLoveLit. We'd love to know if you had the same sort of takes on Wanda and Vision's relationship and on Sexy Robot Men that Ayani has.
I mean, I really want to know your thoughts on Sexy Robot Men, obviously. And as a reminder, don't forget to subscribe to Sex Love Lit on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And if you would be so kind, we would love it if you would leave reviews for us, because that helps more listeners find us and get to hear our hot takes on everything from K-dramas to witches to hot robots, because I'm not letting that go. We're going to talk about hot robots again at some point.
Oh, I have no doubt.
So what are we talking about in the future? What are some of our coming episodes going to look like?
So some of our upcoming episodes, we are thinking about doing a mini episode on the K-drama True Beauty. There's a particular trope in there that pissed us off. So if you want to hear us be angry, tune in for that. We also have an upcoming episode on the works of Tamora Pierce, the YA fantasy author, and we will have a guest on that episode, Dr. Leah Phillips, who is a YA fantasy scholar. She does excellent work.
But beyond that, the world is our oyster. We're thinking about maybe thinking some on promising young women, or woman, singular, promising young woman, or the smash anime hit Your Name. So yeah, let us know if you have some titles you'd like us to talk about, because we have the time. But all right, I think with that, we are going to wrap up this episode of Sex Love Lit. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.